Hey, and welcome to The Solid Verbal. Now would be a perfect time to consider subscribing. Yeah, that little subscribe button for year-round premium college football content. That's it. Here's the video. Enjoy. Subscribe.
Dan.
Yes, sir.
We have breaking news!
Yeah, the breaking news is we recorded the show that you started listening to a long time ago. My voice is not as great, but it's at least a little bit better than Paul Chryst's current employment status. Is that correct?
Absolutely wild. Paul Chryst, the latest victim of this incredible college football coaching carousel. Paul Chryst officially out at time of recording. We recorded our podcast earlier. We're cutting this in a little bit after the fact. Paul Chryst out at Wisconsin. He's been there since 2015. His record 67-26 overall. This, of course, is just wild. Paul Chryst is sort of viewed as a Wisconsin lifer. He's been there for a good long time. He was part of that Bret Bielema regime that was very successful at Wisconsin before things went a much different direction in Madison. But now this is just the latest name on top of what is growing to be a trend, for better or worse, in college football, where after each and every week we talk about who did well, who didn't do well. Obviously, Wisconsin lost in rather embarrassing fashion to Illinois, 34-10, a loss at home, 2 rushing yards, which is very uncharacteristic for a Wisconsin Badgers football team. And the news broke just a short while ago. So the interim is Jim Leonhard. Many folks online saying Jim Leonhard's probably going to be potentially the next coach at Wisconsin. He might get this gig on more of a permanent basis. I've seen a lot of the other names that you might expect, given where we're at in college football, right? The Lance Leipolds, the Matt Campbells. I've seen the Bill O'Briens, like all the usuals, right? That I think we're used to hearing at this point in time with all the coaching vacancies. But man, what a shock here on a Sunday night.
Yeah, Paul Chryst had a ton of success in Madison. And you're right about the lifer thing. From Wisconsin, was a Wisconsin quarterback, like the son of a college football coach, I believe, in Wisconsin, that it's for certain the Badger DNA is strong within Paul Chryst. And, you know, you go back to his time replacing Bret Bielema. Of course, he was at Pitt very briefly, if you remember, and takes the job when Bret Bielema leaves and has led Wisconsin to a number of huge bowl games, you know, has won the West, has won the conference. If you remember the Big Ten championship game against Nebraska, in which they rushed for 48,000 yards in a single game. The highs of the Paul Chryst era were extraordinarily high. Just the running backs produced, the defenses produced, the upsets that Wisconsin was involved in with, you know, what we perceive to be bigger teams, bigger programs. And it's just these past, I mean, you say past couple years, and it's not, they won a bunch of games last year. After they started slowly in September, they won 10 games, I believe, in 2019. If you remember, they just absolutely shelled, if I'm getting my years mixed up, I apologize, but they did shell Miami and I believe the Orange Bowl, correct?
Right.
Where he was seen mouthing turnover chain, my effing ass, right?
Yeah.
He was like the platonic ideal when things were working, even with so quarterbacks, when it's Jack Cohn, when it's Joel Stave, when it's Alex Hornibrook, guys that, you know, weren't really developed into upper echelon guys, but were efficient. And that type of thing can work if the offensive line is there, if the running backs are there, if the tight ends are there, and everything coalesces and comes together successfully. As long as that's happening, you're winning 9.5 to 10.5 games a season, and it's gravy that Wisconsin has this brand of big bruising football that wins you a ton of games, that makes them a pain in the flippin' ass to play against.
Wow.
And that was the absolute height. You look at those running backs, Monty Ball and Melvin Gordon and Jonathan Taylor. These guys are all everything for a reason. They were put in a position to win. They developed their NFL caliber backs, but it's gotten pretty ugly. Offensively, specifically, it's gotten pretty stale. You mix that with the number of dollars that the Big Ten currently and will continue to make from television money, and I never think that it's always about wins and losses. Like it's probably the biggest thing in a situation like this. But you know, behind the scenes, there's always going to be personality conflict, even with wins, even with losses, whatever. And it's just wild that, I mean, he hasn't been there forever, ever, but just in this era of college football, he is like an elder statesman with Wisconsin.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just indicative of where we're at in college football. And we've talked about it ad nauseum on the podcast, right? In this new era of college football where money is more overtly taking front seat in the way things go, it just dials up the pressure on coaches. And I think it may provide more of an impetus for these programs to make a move sooner than they might expect, to also throw their hat in the ring for whatever prime coaches might be out there, right?
Sure.
Dave Aranda is another name that I would expect we'll hear with regard to Wisconsin, right? You don't want to be the last one on the bus here with a coaching vacancy. You want to make sure that you've given yourself a lot of time. If it's something you know you're going to do, give yourself ample opportunity to go out and pursue some of these better candidates that might be willing to listen to your offer. I don't know. It's just wild that they would make this move on a Sunday night after week 5 as we start the month of October, moving away from Paul Chryst. So we'll see which direction this heads, Dan.
Yeah.
Obviously, very early on in the game here, I'm sure this will be one of the preeminent jobs that we'll discuss over and over throughout the course of the college football season now. But Paul Chryst officially out at Wisconsin. Just crazy.
And it's smart if internally they had already started having a conversation about Jim Leonhard. It's smart if they're saying to themselves, things have grown stale. We've reached an impasse. Paul Chryst has largely done an excellent job for us and taken this program to a really good place by and large. But we all sort of feel, and I'm sort of inhabiting the heads of the brain trust that is Wisconsin football, we all sort of feel like we have that next guy. And look, I root for a team where this sort of happened, but without maybe... Chip Kelly was the offensive coordinator in 2007, 2008 when Oregon was in a great place. And he was a hot shot in a way that I don't think Jim Leonhard quite is at the moment. But if Wisconsin people feel like Leonhard is like, this is clearly the guy, like he was an All-American for us. He's done a fantastic job as a defensive coordinator. You know, he's come up through the ranks. We know he wants to be here and he is himself a Wisconsin guy. Then it actually does make sense to give him a chance to sort of see how the chair fits and feels. Yeah. That makes sense. If this is that sort of trial balloon, or if it's a trial balloon to say it's time to start looking around and go outside of the capital W Wisconsin capital G guy, right? That the jobs that have opened up already have opened because these schools want a head start, whether it's Arizona State, whether it's Georgia Tech, Nebraska, whatever, that everybody wants to start doing due diligence. Everybody wants to start putting out feelers, and Wisconsin's no different. That if they're positive they were going to make this move in December, no matter what, especially, you know, embarrassing yourself at home in that way. Like Illinois is an up and coming program, but with the Bret Bielema thing, I think Wisconsin's a very good job. It's a very, very good job that has very specific uphill challenges, namely Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. That those schools are always going to be ahead in terms of national brand. And Wisconsin's in this great place of being that local brand that attracts Wisconsin kids, that attracts kids in the Midwest that are, you know, want to develop as offensive linemen, want to play like a bruising style, want to develop into really good linebackers or edge rushers, whatever. But it's more challenging because they're not going to string together top 10, top 12, top 20 classes most of the time. Yeah. And so it's going to take some bit of modernization just in terms of, you know, they hit the portal hard. They did a number of things to try and modernize. They tried to hire a new offensive coordinator. I mean, they did, but it just felt like they were trying to do all these newfangled things with the same guy who wanted to do things the same old way. And so there was that weird mix of trying to modernize with a more stubborn background. And so the change needed to happen.
I mean, look, the proof is in the pudding, frankly. Yeah. And you hate to see it for Paul Chryst, who by all accounts seems like a good dude who was through and through Wisconsin, but the results weren't there. And college football is changing very quickly. Results matter to an extent that they maybe didn't before. Paul Chryst out. I am curious to hear from Wisconsin fans. Please write in solidverbal@gmail.com. Please comment on our videos. Please comment on our podcasts, wherever it is that this finds you. If you are a Wisconsin fan, even if you're just familiar with the job and have an opinion, I'd be curious to hear, do you think Jim Leonhard staying basically inside the house, the capital W house, is the right move? Or is this a program that needs to modernize and just sort of go outside?
Well, Jim Leonhard he's a younger guy.
Yeah.
And presumably, if he is the guy long term, he's going to have his own vision because he is going to have leverage. Because we've already seen his name come up for jobs, and I'm sure he's going to get interviews and interest. So he will have that opportunity as a younger guy coming from the defensive side of the ball, much like Barry Alvarez, to say, hey, this is how I think Wisconsin needs to move into the 27th century kind of thing.
Well, I yearned for the days of Graham Mertz's 5-touchdown showing against Illinois way back when.
Yeah.
And perhaps in the Jim Leonhard era, however long or short it may be, we will get a little bit more of that. The big news here, Paul Chryst out. More to come on who the next name will be in. Keep it right here on the Solid Verbal for news as it becomes available.